This video is about the rise and fall of German empires and their wars. Subscribe for more. In the heart of Berlin, there crackled with tension in the spring of 1945. The once proud city lay in ruins, its streets littered with the debris of war. Charred buildings stood as silent witnesses to the chaos that had engulfed Europe. As the last remnants of the German Wehrmacht battled against the encroaching Soviet forces from the east, a palpable sense of desperation permeated the atmosphere. The Third Reich, once an emblem of German supremacy, was crumbling. Among the rubble, a figure emerged: Erich Weber, a captain in the German army. His uniform was tattered, his face smeared with soot and ash. Erich was not just another soldier, he was a strategist, known for his bold tactics and an unwavering sense of duty. Yet in these final days, as he surveyed the ruined landscape of his homeland, doubts crept into his mind. Were his sacrifices worth it? Will history remember him as a hero or a villain in this catastrophic saga? A few blocks away, amid the chaos, a small group of young men gathered in a dilapidated cafe. They were members of the German resistance, determined to fight not for the Reich, but for a fractured Germany. Lucas Schneider, their leader, a fiery idealist, sought to protect his nation from the horrors of totalitarianism. He firmly believed that the remnants of the Reich must be resisted, even as the Allies closed in. Lucas had an audacious plan to sabotage the retreating German forces, hoping to impede their advance and buy time for a peaceful resolution. As night fell, the cafe buzzed with energy. The men whispered among themselves, fueled by their growing sense of purpose. The clock struck midnight, and Erich found himself wandering through the city, drawn to the sound of hushed voices emanating from the cafe. Curious, he approached the entrance and overheard Lucas explaining his vision of a new Germany, one free from the shackles of tyranny. Caught off guard, Erich hesitated, wrestling with his conscience. Should he join these men, or remain loyal to a regime that had led his nation to ruin? The very thought of betrayal gnawed at him. Yet, as he listened to Lucas's impassioned speech, the notion of loyalty began to waver. Lucas spoke of unity and rebuilding, of the ideals that once made Germany great, values that had long been overshadowed by hatred and bloodshed. Suddenly, the sound of artillery fire echoed in the distance, shaking the ground beneath their feet. Erich looked out the window and saw the glow of explosions illuminating the night sky. The Red Army was drawing closer, and panic surged through the resistance group. Realizing they had limited time, Lucas called for action. They would need to move quickly to execute their plan. A decision crystallized in Erich's mind. He stepped through the door, joining the group, feeling an unexpected sense of camaraderie. "I can help," he declared, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. The resistance men turned, surprise etched on their faces. First soldier of the Reich truly stand with them. But Lucas nodded, recognizing the opportunity. Meanwhile, on the other side of the Atlantic, far removed from the ruins of Berlin, President Harry S. Truman sat in the Oval Office, contemplating the tumultuous events unfolding in Europe. Unbeknownst to many, the Allied forces had already begun discussions about post-war Europe, the fate of the German nation hanging in a balance. With the dawn of the atomic age looming, Truman faced a monumental decision: how to reshape a continent ravaged by war, to forge a new order that would prevent the rise of another tyrant. As Truman scribbled notes on a notepad, he thought of the countless lives lost, the sacrifices made by young men on the battlefield. He recalled the stories from the front lines, the valor of American soldiers fighting to liberate Europe, the courage of those resisting oppression in Germany. He understood that the future of Europe depended on the decisions made in this room, a delicate balance between justice and vengeance. Back in Berlin, as dawn broke, Erich and the resistance group moved through the shadowy streets, dodging patrols and shattered glass. They had successfully gathered critical information about the German troops' movements, and time was of the essence. Each step closer to their goal sent waves of adrenaline coursing through Erich's veins. This was not just a mission, it was a chance to reclaim his honor. As they approached a vital supply depot, tension simmered. Lucas laid out the plan, sabotaged the weapons and supplies meant for the retreating German forces, creating a bottleneck that would slow the Soviet advance. The stakes were high, but the stakes of doing nothing were even higher. If they succeeded, they could save lives, both German and Allied. But as they prepared for the assault, a chilling sound broke the dawn silence. The distant rumble of tanks echoed through the city, a grim reminder that the enemy was near. Panic bubbled within the group, but Lucas rallied them, invoking their shared dream of a better Germany. "We are not just fighting for ourselves," he shouted. "We are fighting for our future." Erich felt a surge of hope. He had never imagined he would be here, standing shoulder to shoulder with men who had once been his enemies, united by a common cause. The moment felt surreal, as if the weight of history bore down upon them. With a nod of determination, they moved closer to the depot, their hearts pounding with a mix of fear and resolve. Suddenly, a shadow loomed behind them, a German patrol alerted by the chaos. The sound of boots crunching on debris grew closer, and in an instant the group was surrounded. Eric's instincts kicked in. He reached for his sidearm, his training taking over. "Get back," he shouted, aiming at the approaching soldiers. But before he could fire, Lucas intervened, raising his hands in surrender. "We don't want to fight," Lucas pleaded, stepping forward. Eric's heart raced. What was he doing? Did Lucas truly believe they could negotiate their way out of this? The German soldiers paused, confusion etched on their faces, unsure whether to trust their former ally or to see him as a traitor. An uneasy silence enveloped the scene as Eric weighed his options. Here stood a pivotal moment. Could they turn this confrontation to their advantage? He could almost hear the echoes of history whispering around him, urging him to seize control. But the fate of both alliances hung in the balance, and Eric understood that their next move could redefine their destinies forever. As tensions escalated, a single gunshot pierced the air, shattering the moment. In a blink of an eye, alliances would be forged or broken, lines would be drawn, and the ghost of war would loom larger than ever. In that instant, the question lingered: could a fractured Germany emerge from the ashes, or would this cycle of violence continue? The clock was ticking, and as the dust settled, the stage was set for a new chapter in the war's history. With the burden of choice resting heavily upon them, Erich could only wonder what the fallout of this moment would be. Would they find redemption in conflict, or would they be consumed by the very war they sought to escape? The answer awaited them on the other side of the gunfire, as a story of forgotten heroes and the rise of a new Germany hung in the balance. And thus, with hearts pounding and destinies intertwined, the next act of their struggle began to unfold, leading them toward a confrontation that would echo through the ages, a confrontation not just for Germany, but for the very soul of Europe. The gunshot echoed through the crumbling streets of Berlin, a harsh reminder of the chaos that had engulfed the city. Eric's heart pounded as he instinctively turned toward the source of the sound. The German patrol hesitated, the tension thick in the air. In that fleeting moment, everything could change. Erich exchanged a glance with Lucas, whose expression shifted from determination to sheer resolve. The patrol sergeant barked commands, snapping the soldiers from their stupor. "Hands up. Identify yourselves." The soldiers aimed their rifles, eyes darting from Erich, dressed in a tattered uniform, to Lucas and his band of resistance fighters. "We not your enemy, sir," Lucas shouted, raising his arms. "We're trying to stop the war. We want to help bring an end to the bloodshed." Erich's instinct screamed at him to draw his weapon. But Lucas's brave proclamation caught him off guard. Could their words penetrate the haze of distrust woven through their shared history? The sergeant, a young man with weary eyes, seemed to waver. "Why would you turn against your country?" "Because the country you're fighting for is gone," Erich interjected, stepping forward, his voice steady. "The future has led us to destruction. We're trying to save what remains of our homeland." The patrol's tension eased slightly, uncertainty creeping into their ranks. "And what do you plan to do? Sabotage your own men?" the sergeant asked, brow furrowing. Lucas seized the chance. "If we don't act, the Rye will fall, but so will countless lives. Help us." A murmur ran through the patrol. The sergeant weighed their options, glancing at his soldiers, who looked as torn as he was. Just then, another gunshot rang out, followed by the thunderous roar of a tank, echoing from the direction of the front lines. The sound snapped the sergeant back to reality. "Quick, we don't have time for this," he barked, eyes darting. "What is your plan?" "Make it quick." Time was slipping away, and Erich felt the moment of truth hanging in the balance. "We need to create a diversion. Your men can help us draw attention away from the depot." The sergeant hesitated, glancing back toward the gunfire. "It is suicide," he muttered, fear flickering in his eyes. "It is a chance to save lives." Lucas urged, his voice rising above the clamor. "We need to act now." A look of determination hardened the sergeant's features. "All right, we'll buy you time. Just don't get us killed in the process." With a curt nod, the sergeant gathered his men and they prepared to engage. As they moved to position themselves against the approaching tank, Erich and Lucas exchanged a brief look of understanding. They had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. Under the cover of the German patrol, Erich and the resistance fighters raced toward the supply depot. The streets felt alive with the rumble of distant artillery and the impending dread of battle. As they ducked through alleyways, every heartbeat echoed the urgency of their mission. They reached the depot, a sprawling structure filled with crates and barrels, a stench of gunpowder permeating the air. "We need to set explosives on the supply lines," Erich instructed, focusing on the task ahead. Lucas nodded, directing the other men to gather materials. The sound of clanking metal and hurried whispers reverberated as they worked. The clock was ticking, and the rumble of tanks grew closer. With each passing moment, the reality of their actions settled in. Suddenly, a loud explosion erupted from the direction of the patrol, followed by gunfire. The sergeant and his men were engaged, attempting to hold back the advancing Soviet forces. "Time's up," Lucas shouted, adrenaline coursing through him. "Let us move." They worked quickly, rigging the explosives to the supply lines with trembling hands. The pressure of the moment heightened their senses, each second feeling like an eternity. Erich took one last look at the supplies, realizing the magnitude of what they were about to do. As they completed the setup, distant voices grew louder, and the sound of tank treads echoed ominously through the streets. They had mere moments left. "Get back, we need distance," Lucas urged, leading the group away from the depot. They sprinted toward a nearby building, ducking behind crumbling walls just as the blast illuminated the night sky. The shockwave knocked them to the ground, and the ground trembled beneath them. Through the rising dust and debris, Erich felt a rush of exhilaration and horror. They had stopped the supplies, but at what cost? The sounds of chaos grew louder as the German patrol fought desperately against the Soviets, and Erich understood that the tide had shifted. As they caught their breath, the reality of their actions sunk in. They were no longer fighting for the right, but for a vision of a Germany reborn. But could that vision withstand the fury of war looming just beyond their reach? "What now?" one of the younger fighters asked, eyes wide with uncertainty. "For now, we regroup and find a way to connect with the other resistance groups," Lucas replied, his voice steady. "We need to unify if there is any hope left." But before they could strategize, the distant rumble of tanks echoed steadily closer, and Erich's heart sank. The German patrol, now entangled in a fierce firefight, would be overwhelmed without reinforcements. "Lucas, we need to help them," Erich urged, his pulse racing. "Without their support, we're outnumbered." The Lucas hesitated, torn between their mission and the lives of the men they had just allied with. "But we can't expose ourselves. We'll be caught in the crossfire." Erich's voice was firm, resolute. "If we don't act, the moment we've created will be lost. We have to protect what we've started." With a surge of determination, Lucas nodded, setting their course. "All right, we do it together. We fight." The group moved stealthily back towards the fray, shadows against the crumbling buildings. The sounds of gunfire and shouts of soldiers engulfed them, sending adrenaline racing through their veins. As they neared the skirmish, Erich could see figures engaged in a desperate struggle. Lucas shouted as he burst into the open, sprinting toward the nearest German soldier, who was pinned down behind a wall. Erich followed closely, instinct kicking in as he returned fire. The chaos erupted around them, their ragtag group against the well-armed Soviet forces. Bullets whizzed by, sending plumes of dust and dirt into the air. Erich took cover, his heart pounding. He had once fought for the right, but now he was here, fighting for something greater. With resolve, he took aim, firing at the oncoming soldiers. The weight of his rifle felt both familiar and foreign, a reminder of who he had been and who he was becoming. Beside him, Lucas shouted encouragement, rallying the German patrol. "We can hold them. We need to protect this ground." The fight raged on as Erich struggled to reconcile the chaos around him with the vision Lucas had inspired. Each shot fired felt like a step toward a new future, but every life lost weighed heavily on his conscience. With the sound of explosions and the cries of men filling the air, the line between friend and foe blurred. In that moment, as the embers of conflict ignited a spark of hope, Erich understood that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges. But before he could fully grasp the implications of this battle, a sudden, deafening roar filled the air, the unmistakable sound of an aircraft overhead. "Get down," he shouted, pushing Lucas aside as a massive bomber swooped low, releasing its payload. The world around them erupted into chaos as flames engulfed the area, and Erich felt the heat on his face. In an instant, everything began to unravel. As the smoke cleared, Erich realized they were in a war far beyond their control, and as fear gripped his heart, he understood they were now part of a larger narrative. Would this moment prove to be a turning point for a nation in turmoil, or merely another footnote in the annals of history? As they fought for survival amidst the storm, a question loomed: would they emerge from this battle as heroes of a new Germany, or fall victim to the very war they sought to change? The answer awaited them in fire and fury, and the stage was set for a reckoning that would echo through the ages. The deafening roar of the bomber overhead drowned out the chaos erupting around Erich and Lucas. The world seemed to slow as they ducked instinctively, the ground trembling beneath them. Eyes wide, Erich felt a surge of adrenaline, a fiery reminder of the stakes at hand. The bomber as shadows swept over them, and he could only think of what lay ahead if they didn't survive this. The aircraft released its payload. A series of explosions ignited the battlefield, sending debris flying in all directions. Erich shielded his face with his arms, heart racing, as the shockwave knocked him off his feet. Dust and smoke enveloped the area, and screams filled the air. He struggled to regain his bearings, adrenaline coursing through him as he staggered to his feet. He shouted, searching through the haze for the fiery idealist. Lucas. Emerging from the smoke, Lucas stumbled toward him, his expression a mixture of shock and determination. We have to regroup. The resistance, the patrol, everyone is scattered. Erich nodded, his mind racing. They had to find the German patrol. Without their nearly forged alliance, this battle would be lost. They were merely a handful of fighters against an advancing tide of Soviet soldiers. The sound of gunfire crackled in the distance, a constant reminder of the threat closing in around them. Follow me, oh. Erich called, forging a path through the chaos. They navigated the wreckage of fallen buildings and debris, dodging stray gunfire. The air was thick with smoke, acrid and suffocating, but they pressed on, driven by the flickering hope of survival. Finally, they reached a small alley, its walls scarred by the remnants of battle. As they ducked into its shadows, Erich caught sight of the German patrol holed up behind a crumbling barricade, firing their weapons at the encroaching Soviet forces. The sergeant he had spoken to earlier was there, defiance etched across his face. Erich shouted, waving his arms to get his attention. The sergeant looked up, recognition dawning in his eyes. "We read back, we can help," they didn't cover, the sergeant replied, voice strained as he ducked to avoid incoming fire. "We are numbered here, or we have an idea." Lucas interjected, stepping forward with purpose. "If we can draw their fire, we can flank them from the side." The sergeant hesitated, gauging the sincerity of their offer. The situation was dire, and the seconds ticked by like hours. "But if this goes south, you are on your own." With a nod, Erich and Lucas quickly relayed their plan to the patrol. They would create a distraction, drawing Soviet attention away from their position. It was a desperate gamble, but desperation was now their only ally. Lucas ordered, "We'll create a diversion near the front." As they moved into position, Erich felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. The fate of these men rested on their plan. They swiftly navigated through the debris, hearts pounding, anticipation mingling with fear. The sound of gunfire intensified as they approached the front, a cacophony of violence that echoed through the streets. "On three," Lucas whispered, adrenaline sharpening their senses. 1, 2. Before he could say 3, they burst into the open, firing their weapons toward the Soviet ranks. The sudden assault caught the soldiers off guard, chaos rippling through their formation. Erich shouted, and chaos consumed the area as Lucas and he darted toward the side, drawing fire from the enemy. Bullets whizzed by, the air thick with smoke and tension. The sound of gunfire and shouts filled their ears, but they pushed forward, desperate to create a breach. The German patrol, witnessing the distraction unfold, seized the opportunity to reset their position. The sergeant rallied his men, pushing forward, flanking the Soviets as Erich and Lucas continued their assault. Lucas yelled, excitement igniting his voice. They had made a difference. In this moment, hope flickered like a candle against the darkness of impending doom. But just as victory seemed within reach, an explosion echoed nearby, a mortar shell landing perilously close. The shockwave sent Erich tumbling to the ground, the world spinning around him as he fought to regain his senses. "Erich." Lucas' voice cut through the haze, pulling him back to reality. He blinked, shaken but unharmed, and saw Lucas battling his way toward him, determination burning in his eyes. "Get up, we need to move," Lucas insisted, pulling Erich to his feet. They had to regroup with the patrol. This battle was far from over. As they rushed back toward the barricade, Erich caught sight of the sergeant coordinating the assault, his voice booming with authority. The German soldiers were pushing back, but the Soviet forces were relentless, a wave of red sweeping toward them. "Erich," the sergeant called. We be holding, but we need more firepower. We can let them take this ground. Erich's mind raced, searching for a solution. There is a cache of weapons a block away. If we can reach it, we might turn the tide. Then let us go, Lucas shouted, his resolve unshaken. They turned, moving swiftly, dodging fire as they made their way through the wreckage. The streets around them were alive with violence, but their purpose propelled them forward. They reached the cache, a dilapidated building teeming with ammunition and supplies. While Lucas and one of the patrol soldiers began gathering weapons, Erich kept watch, his heart pounding as he listened to the distant sounds of battle. Come on, Lucas urged. They worked quickly, adrenaline fueling their efforts, but the distant rumble of tanks indicated that time was slipping away. Suddenly, a familiar roar rumbled overhead. The same bomber from before was circling back, its ominous shadow darkening the ground. Erich yelled, instinctively pushing Lucas and the soldier to the ground as the aircraft unleashed its deadly cargo. Explosions erupted around them, debris raining down like hail. As the smoke cleared, Erich glanced at Lucas, who was staring back, eyes wide with fear. They had to move, but a new wave of Soviet soldiers was advancing. We resurrounded. Lucas shouted, panic creeping into his voice. What do we do? A fight, Erich replied, steeling himself. Just as they prepared to engage, the ground shook violently and the air filled with an unearthly noise. A new presence had entered the fray. A convoy of American tanks rumbled into view, the guns swiveling as they unleashed a barrage of fire upon the advancing Soviets. American forces, the sergeant exclaimed, eyes lighting up with astonishment. We might just stand a chance. Erich felt a surge of relief wash over him. As the Americans pressed forward, the tide of battle began to shift once more. The combined resistance of German soldiers and American forces pushed back against the Soviets, reclaiming what had been lost. But even as the battlefield transformed, a sense of dread still gripped Erich. He knew the war was far from over. Alliances were forged in the heat of battle, but the aftermath would be just as complicated. Would this moment of unity last, or would the old ghosts of enmity rise and tear asunder what had been built? As the smoke cleared and the cacophony of battle subsided into the distant echoes of survival, Erich felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had fought for a vision of Germany reborn, but the road ahead would be fraught with challenges. The question lingered in his mind: could they embrace the possibility for a united future, or would they remain shackled by the chains of their past? As the sun dipped beneath the horizon, the shadows of uncertainty loomed large. The next chapter of their struggle was on the horizon, and only time would tell if hope could rise from the ashes of war. The clash for the soul of Germany had only just begun as the sun dipped beneath the horizon, casting the streets of Berlin in a fiery glow. The sounds of battle began to fade. The battered remnants of the German patrol and the improvised resistance group, now bolstered by the presence of American tanks, stood together in the midst of chaos. The air was thick with the acrid smell of smoke and gunpowder, but among the ruins, a whisper of hope began to stir. Erich surveyed the battlefield, his heart pounding as he absorbed the scene. The German soldiers, once resolute in their loyalty to the Reich, now fought alongside men they had previously considered enemies. This unexpected alliance had shifted the tides of battle, but he knew it was merely a momentary reprieve. The larger conflict still loomed, and the road ahead would require more than just courage. It would demand unity. Sergeant, Lucas called, his voice cutting through the haze of uncertainty. The sergeant nodded, gesturing for the remaining men to fall back to a more defensible position. We can't let the momentum slip away. We have to secure this area and prepare for another wave. The patrol moved with purpose, but Erich felt the familiar weight on his shoulders. The thought of rebuilding their nation, of moving beyond the shadows of tyranny and hatred, weighed heavily on him. It was no longer just about survival, it was about forging a future. He turned to Lucas, who was busy coordinating the soldiers. We need a plan for after this fight. If we want to create a new Germany, we have to reach out to other resistance groups and rebuild. Lucas paused, his brow furrowed in thought. You were right. We can't just fight without a vision. We need to unite all factions opposed to the Reich, even those who resisted in their own ways. With renewed determination, he began to gather the men around him, rallying their spirits for what lay ahead. Meanwhile, the American forces continued their advance, their tanks roaring as they pushed back the Soviets with relentless firepower. Erich watched in awe as they coordinated their strikes with precision, a testament to the strength of their allies. Yet, he was also keenly aware that this moment of cooperation could easily dissolve into mistrust once the immediate threat subsided. The battle for Berlin may have shifted the balance, but the war for Germany's future had only just begun. As they regrouped, the sergeant approached Erich, his expression a mix of respect and uncertainty. "You fought with honor today, Captain Weber. I never thought I'd be fighting alongside a soldier of the Reich." The words were heavy with implications, but Erich met his eyes, understanding the shifting landscape of allegiance. "Today, we were fighting for something greater than flags or ideologies," Erich replied, his voice steady. "We were fighting for the people, our families, our neighbors. We have to ensure that this chaos doesn't consume us entirely." The sergeant nodded, visibly moved by Erich's conviction. As the sun sank further, night began to cloak the city. The sound of distant artillery was punctuated by an easy silence, a moment of calm before the storm. Erich felt a chill run down his spine as he realized they were not only battling the Soviets but the ghosts of their past, the memories of a Germany fractured by war. "Gather everyone," Lucas shouted, rallying the remaining fighters. "We need to lay out a plan. We can't afford to lose this momentum." The men huddled together, the flickering flames of makeshift torches illuminating their faces. A sense of camaraderie emerged, a shared understanding that they were all fighting for a new narrative, one that sought to redefine what it meant to be German. "We need to reach out to the other resistance groups across the country," Lucas continued, his voice ringing with urgency. "There are pockets of fighters who, like us, want to see a Germany freed from tyranny. If we can form an alliance, we might stand a chance against the remnants of the Reich." Erich nodded. "And we must address the citizens left in the ruins. They need to know they're not alone. We can't just fight. We must offer hope, a vision for a future where unity prevails." The men murmured their agreement, the resolve strengthening in their hearts. As the strategies unfolded, the sergeant chimed in. "We've been battling for survival, but if we want to carve out the new Germany, we need to secure our positions and gather resources. We can't let the Soviets push us back." Just then, the sound of distant engines approached, and everyone fell silent. The silhouette of more tanks emerged through the smoke, the unmistakable insignia of American forces. Relief washed over Erich as they rolled into view, their guns aimed, ready to engage. "American reinforcements," Lucas exclaimed, his face alight with hope. "With their support, we can hold this ground." As the soldiers took positions alongside their German counterparts, a newfound sense of purpose surged through Erich. They were not merely soldiers of separate nations, they were united against oppression. The night descended quickly, and soon the battlefield transformed into a cacophony of gunfire and explosions. The Americans held their ground alongside the German fighters, their unity a powerful symbol of resilience. As the Soviet forces advanced, Erich felt a determination ignite within him. Each shot fired was a testament to their belief in a shared future. Hours passed in a blur of combat, each moment stretching into eternity. They fought fiercely, but fatigue weighed on their bodies. The sergeant, Lucas, and Erich moved through the chaos, rallying their comrades, urging them to keep pushing forward. "For Germany, for our future," they cried, their voices ringing through the night. Yet, as dawn broke, signaling a new day, the battle showed no signs of abating. The Soviets were relentless, their numbers overwhelming. But just when all hope seemed lost, an unexpected development emerged. From the distance, the sound of an approaching convoy echoed through the streets. "Air support," the soldier shouted, pointing to the sky. The unmistakable silhouette of Allied aircraft appeared, diving toward the battlefield. With a roar, bombs fell, striking the Soviet positions with precision. "Keep pushing," Erich urged, his voice buoyed by the sight of their allies. The tide began to turn, the combined forces of American air support and ground troops creating a path through the chaos. The Soviets faltered, their advance stalling under the relentless assault. As the morning sun illuminated the ruins of Berlin, Erich, Lucas, and the sergeant pressed forward, urging their men to capitalize on the disarray. The fighting reached a fever pitch, and with each push, the dream of a unified Germany blossomed on the horizon. By midday, the battlefield was transformed. The once encroaching Soviet forces were in retreat, driven back by the tenacity of the German fighters and their American allies. Exhausted but triumphant, Erich felt a surge of hope, the first glimmer of a new dawn. As the last remnants of the conflict subsided, Erich stood among the rubble, surveying the faces of his comrades. They were tired, dirty by war, yet there was a newfound light in their eyes, a shared commitment to redefine what it meant to be German. "Today, we fought not as enemies, but as brothers," Erich proclaimed, his voice resonating with conviction. This was more than a battle, it was a declaration of our intent to rise from the ashes of war. We must continue to fight, and not just for survival, but for a future that embraces unity, peace, and understanding. The men rallied around him, their spirits ignited by the promise of change. They knew the fight for their nation was far from over. They would face challenges ahead, but together they would forge a new path. As the sun set on that fateful day, the ghosts of their past whispered in the winds, and for the first time in years, a sense of hope washed over the streets of Berlin, a hope for a Germany reborn, one that would rise from the ruins of war and embrace a future of possibility. In the heart of Europe, the battles fought that day would echo through history, a turning point not just for a nation, but for the entire continent. The struggle for peace and unity had begun, and the spirit of resistance would forge a new legacy for generations to come.